Grinch in Texas is behind bars this morning after being caught on camera stealing her neighbor's Christmas lights.
She's the former TV news anchor accused of killing her own mom. But now there has been a major twist in her case.
All right, are you Ms. Mock?
The new development that has stopped this case in its tracks, at least for now. We're on the case presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. All right, real quick, before we start this episode of On the Case, there is a reason this show is one of the top shows on YouTube, and there's a reason that Morgan & Morgan is America's largest personal injury law firm. They have more than 1,000 attorneys who have recovered $25 billion from more than 500,000 clients. And in the past few months alone, a client in Florida received $12 million when insurance offered just $350,000. In Pennsylvania, another client was awarded $26 million. That is 40 times the insurer's offer. Morgan & Morgan makes it easy to fight for what you deserve. You can even start a claim on your phone. So if you're injured, you can start a claim at forthepeople.com/OTC. You can click the link below or scan the QR code on your screen. All right, we have a lot of new information to get to in the case of Angelynn Mock. This is someone who was once a morning news anchor, the person you wake up to, always has that cheerful personality. But now she is in the custody of the state of Kansas, and there's a lot more we're learning about Angelynn Mock's background and potentially what she has been dealing with in her life. But to understand this new information, I want to start with the background of how we got to this point, and it starts on Halloween. This story really first broke through the perspective of a neighbor who told a local television station that she was at her house and a woman comes up to her and her boyfriend. The woman is covered in blood and the woman needs to call 911.
2224, Supervisor Beaton, 4 Park Heading, 1514 East Valley Street, operating on top.
That was the call that then went from dispatch to Wichita police. And when Wichita police got to a home on Crowley Street, that is when they found 81-year-old Anita Avers. Police say this woman was found stabbed multiple times. She was in her bed. She would be transported to a hospital, and that is where she lost her life. Now, the woman who had allegedly been covered in blood looking to call 911, the person who made the 911 call, was Anita's own daughter. Her name, Angelynn Mock. She's 47 years old. Now, police arrested her. They charged her with her mom's murder, accusing her of stabbing Avers multiple times inside their home. Now, as much as law enforcement first said that they believe that this was a premeditated murder, there is more to this story that is coming to light. And it doesn't appear that this case was as much about a mystery of figuring out who killed Anita Avers as it is one that centers around the very important question of why it allegedly happened. And that's where we're going to get into this new information about Angelynn, her life, and what may have happened in the last couple of years. Because what makes this story so shocking isn't just, of course, the details that are incredibly difficult to comprehend and are very shocking about what allegedly happened in the home. It's shocking also because of who Angelynn Mock once was.
And welcome, Angelynn Mock.
Thank you.
There you go.
I'm so excited to be here, and I look forward to connecting with you guys out there in St. Louis.
So Angelynn Mock was known as Angie Mock to the many people who tuned in to morning news in cities like St. Louis more than a decade ago. This is per Fox 2 in St. Louis. This is a video that is on their public YouTube page that they posted in 2011, welcoming Angie Mock as the newest anchor who was part of their news team. Now, according to Angie Mock's LinkedIn page, she worked in local news for more than a decade. Now, I can tell you that local news, it is a job that it is a lot of fun, but it is not as glamorous as it might look on the outside. The hours are brutal. You're working holidays, and there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes. It's a grind. But it appears that Angie Mock was up for the task in her career, that she paid her dues, that she worked hard to get to where she was in her career. And it was a career that started in November 2002. She was a sports reporter starting out in tiny Lincoln, Nebraska. Very small market, but it was a start. And she worked her way up because she goes through other small cities like Rochester, Minnesota. She's in Missoula, Montana for a bit, then makes a pretty good jump to Oklahoma City. And then she lands in the biggest place where she worked, and that was St. Louis. And that's where she was a morning anchor from March of 2011 through February of 2015. Now, after that, she transitioned out of television and got into software sales, according to her LinkedIn page. Now, it's not uncommon for people to leave news because it is such a grind, especially when you think of someone on morning news. I mean, these are shows that start at like 4:30 in the morning. You have to get up hours before, really in the middle of the night. So you do see a lot of people leave the news industry to get into a more typical role. And it seems like Angie Mock made a good move, that she got into software sales. That can be a very lucrative business. Now, it is unclear what happened in those recent years when it comes to mentally what Angie Mock was going through. But she was someone who had such a successful broadcasting career. She was this kind of ray of light you wake up to in the morning with the local news with such positive energy. And then something happened. Now, it is clear that perhaps her biggest fan was her own mom, Anita Avers. This is a picture from Avers' Facebook page, and here's one of Angie and her mom that was posted in 2019. Now, what we know about Anita Avers is not only was she Angie Mock's mom, she was a clinical therapist in Wichita. She worked in the mental health space. She helped people who were dealing with issues of mental health. And mental health is a very important theme when talking about this case, because it is now coming to light that Angie Mock reportedly was diagnosed with a serious mental health condition. Court records show that she has been diagnosed with schizophrenia. Now, we'll have more on how this will play into her case in just a moment, but let's talk about Halloween and the details that law enforcement gathered on that scene October 31st. A neighbor told KAKE TV that Mock ran up to her and her boyfriend after the alleged murder saying, quote, "There was a woman who approached our vehicle like with blood, like her hands were filled, her body was filled with blood, asking to call 911. Now, that neighbor said that Mock then took her cell phone and ran back into the house. And she described Mock acting, quote, scared. I just got the affidavit in this case, and it does give us an idea into what Angie's side of the story was on that day. Before I get to that, here is per Broadcastify what dispatchers were saying as law enforcement was responding to that home on Crowley Street.
In fact, you had to stab the mother to save herself.
So what you just heard there, quote, she had to stab her mother to save herself. Now, both Mock and her mom were taken to the hospital. Police say that Mock had cuts on her hands, but it is unclear if they considered those cuts to be defensive wounds. Now, we were not able to find any previous criminal history for Angie Mock, but when we look at this affidavit, it unveils some new details in this case from what police saw on Halloween and what Angie Mock told them inside the home where she allegedly killed her mom. Now, the affidavit states that when police arrived, they, quote, located a white female standing outside, bleeding, holding a towel. When police went inside, they found Anita Avers, quote, lying on the bed with multiple stab wounds to her face and torso. Police say next to Anita, on the bed, the officer located multiple kitchen-style knives and a cheese grater laid out on a pillow. When police asked Mock what happened and whether her mom was hurt, Mock allegedly said, quote, her face, eyes, and gestured to her torso area. An officer asked what happened, and Angelynn said that she went to her mother's room to talk and saw her sharpening knives. Her mother came after her with a knife and fought her. Angelynn was stronger, so she pushed her back. Her mother then said, quote, I know you're bleeping Jesus Christ. So she backed away. Her mother followed her, so she went around her, grabbed a knife, and got on top of her. Angelynn said that her mother started, quote, spewing venom at me out of her bleeping mouth, end quote. So she had to stab her to save herself. So that is one of the stories that Angie Mock told law enforcement. There's another description of a story she told an officer that went like this. Angelynn then said she went to the bedroom to talk to her mom because she had an upcoming job interview at a local TV station in Wichita, and she's a news anchor. She then said that her mom was sharpening knives and was jealous of her and didn't want her to get the job. She then said her mom chased her around the house and Angie needed to kill her mom because she wasn't going to stop. Angelynn then was read her rights. She said she understood her rights, but did not want to talk anymore, so questioning was over. Police charged Angelynn Mock with first-degree murder. Here is the 47-year-old's mugshot. Now, here's the criminal complaint for the case where prosecutors write, quote, Angelynn Mock did then and there unlawfully, intentionally, and with premeditation kill a human being, Anita Avers.
All right, are you Ms. Mock?
This is Mock making her first court appearance per KSN TV in Wichita, and we noticed that she gave a smile as she entered the room.
In this case, you're charged with a single count of murder in the first degree. This is an off-grid person felony. The bond in your case is set at $1 million. It is with the condition of pretrial services, electronic monitoring, no contact with the victim or state's witnesses, and no contact with your stepfather. The bond in your case, your next hearing in this case will be before Judge Gearing on November 14th at 1:30. Again, November 14th is your next court date. You have completed a financial affidavit. I will approve that, and I will appoint the team of attorneys to represent you as follows: Ian Clark, Brianna George, Jacob Ladani, Randall Price, and Philip White to be the attorneys that represent you. All right? All right, thank you.
Now, at that hearing, the judge said that Mock was not allowed to have contact with her stepdad, and then it moved on to a preliminary hearing, and that's when our cameras were in the courtroom. So here is Mock walking in during that hearing. She was dressed in an orange jail jumpsuit. Her hearing was very brief, but in that hearing, a key moment happened. The defense argued that Mock's case needed to be taken, quote, off docket, meaning it was no longer active. And that's because her attorney had requested that she be evaluated to see if she was competent to stand trial. And now we're learning about what that mental health evaluation found. We did see Mock be very emotional as she left that preliminary hearing. So this is what the evaluation found. Not only does Angie Mock reportedly have schizophrenia, a judge ruled that she is not fit to stand trial. Now here, the judge writes, based on the doctor's report, the court finds Mock to be incompetent to stand trial. The court ordered Mock to then be taken to a mental health treatment facility. And at this point, her case is postponed indefinitely. But it doesn't mean it's over, because after treatment, Mock could eventually be found fit to stand trial. Joining us now to talk about this case and where it could go from here is Sherry Botwin, licensed clinical social worker, a trauma expert, and the author of Thriving After Trauma. It's always great to have you on Law and Crime, because with so many of these cases, there's more to the story. And we're seeing, we heard a bit from police where they thought that this was a premeditated murder. Now we're learning more about what Angie Mock may have been dealing with mentally at the time that all of this took place on Halloween. I want to start first because I know it was reported that it was schizophrenia that she was diagnosed with, but schizoaffective disorder appears to be what the official diagnosis was. What exactly is that?
It's a little bit different than schizophrenia. When you have schizoaffective disorder, there's a mood component. So from what I'm reading, she's having, in combination with the hallucinations and delusions, she also has the depression. So that's where the affective part comes in. So it's
because when, and often unfortunately, when we talk about schizophrenia and certainly in the true crime space, but it's like Nick Reiner recently, that is something that's been coming, that case out of California. What is it about these, especially when you have schizo as the word that is in the diagnosis of someone has, what exactly are we talking about?
So what does that mean? The schizo piece is really addressing when someone is more psychotic, they're having hallucinations, delusions, they can be very paranoid. So when someone has something like major depression, in addition to the schizo, in this case, it would be schizoaffective disorder. If you think about it, if you put those two pieces together, if you're having someone that is morbidly depressed and also looking at others as if they're out to get them, or not seeing things clearly, or not being able to be present to place and time, you put those two things together, that could be a ticking time bomb for someone if they're not receiving the appropriate psychiatric and psychological treatment.
And when we talk about, the age, and there's a lot that we don't know about Angie Mock, because she had this very bright television career And it was one that seemed to be going really well. And then she makes the transition out of news, which a lot of people do because the hours are really tough. And I get that. But at 47 years old, and we don't know when she was diagnosed,
Right.
or what the history was when this issue came about. But it's like I know we were talking with Nick Reiner and his age and how it's just recently he was diagnosed. And that kind of is something you typically don't see, because I do think with schizophrenia, and I might be wrong on this, where it's like, I feel like we're often talking about young men who have been diagnosed with schizophrenia. And here we have a 47-year-old woman with schizoaffective disorder. I guess typically, when do you see that come on in somebody?
It can come on in your early adulthood, but the thing that we have to remember is it can come on, but that doesn't mean that people are going to know it. I don't know Angie's background. Had she been hospitalized in the past? How long had she been seen by a psychiatrist? It's one of those things too, when I think about her age 47, while oftentimes we see things like schizophrenia coming out in early adulthood, that doesn't mean that it can't come out in later adulthood. In her specific case, she's midlife. So when you think about things like when women start to go through things like menopause, and if they're already having some type of serious mental health disorder, again, you put those two things together, that could bring the diagnosis out depending on what's going on in her life. The other thing that I was thinking about with her, when you say she was leaving, the television world, sometimes when people make transitions, when they're changing their jobs, and that's a big transition for someone to be leaving their job, that stress or those feelings about that transition, that can also bring out what is brewing inside of someone, which sometimes can be some serious mental health concerns or issues.
Before we talk about her being found unfit to stand trial, what that means for this case going forward, the affidavit we read through, and for the first time, we're really seeing what Angie Mock had said to investigators, because at the beginning of this, we knew that they wanted first degree murder and that they felt that this was premeditated. And then you hear her statements where they do differ a bit, but then you have, talking about, there's a reference to Jesus Christ, a reference to venom. She talks about her 81-year-old mother was sharpening knives. She said she was going to go to this local television interview, but her mom didn't want it out of jealousy, which that does sound like something where someone's having some sort of mental break. What do you, and that's my unprofessional, just kind of reading through it. But for you as a professional, what do you see when you hear kind of what she was telling law enforcement when they came to the house?
I see this is someone that definitely has some anger and insecurities, but I also can see, when I'm reading this, I can hear it does sound like she's having some type of paranoid thinking or delusions, because she's talking about, it's one thing to say that your mom is jealous, but then to start talking about, saying your mom was out to get you, or focusing on things about the knives. It almost sounds like there's some reality, but then there's also some pieces in the affidavit that sound like it doesn't make sense, and there feels like there's some psychotic or psychosis going on. So I think it's almost like you're trying to blend the part of someone's mind that maybe is rational and has feelings, and then the other part of their mind that may be paranoid and having delusions of some sort. So it's confusing.
And when it comes to her case moving forward, because she made it was a status hearing, and then the defense attorney had said that they would like to do a mental health evaluation to see if she was fit to stand trial, and it came back that she was unfit to stand trial. What does that, I guess, exactly mean as far as what her mental state is, and why would it be that she would be unfit to stand trial?
Yeah, this is so important, because I know that when people in the public or even people involved in these cases are having to hear that, well, the case is paused because she needs to have a mental health evaluation. The thing to keep in mind, and that's so important, is if she's unfit to stand trial, what they're saying is she may not be able to even comply with what the rules are in court. She may not be able to tolerate conversation between her lawyers and the defense. That could trigger a lot of rage. She may not be oriented to the present. So in this case, what they're saying is they need to evaluate her and treat her. If it's schizoaffective disorder, they need to come up with medication treatment, some type of therapy, and then once she's stabilized, then she goes back to court. It doesn't mean that she's not going to have to go to court and that there's not going to be a trial. It means that if you really want justice and you want the system to work for all members involved, everybody in the situation, they have to be able to be sane and present and be able to move through the process. And she, from what I'm reading right now, is deemed unfit, meaning she's not mentally well enough to do what's needed when someone's in court or standing trial.
How does that compare? Because then you'll hear in some cases where someone pleads, by reason of insanity. And how does what we're dealing with now with someone being unfit to stand trial compare to someone who would be found not guilty by reason of insanity?
So to be not guilty by reason of insanity, you have to be able to show that when the crime was committed, that you didn't have the capacity to distinguish between right and wrong. That's not what's happening in this case. They're not saying that she should be found not guilty because she was insane. They're saying she can't go to trial right now because she is not in a state where she's going to be able to tolerate what goes on as you move through the legal system. So while, again, it's incredibly frustrating for everyone involved, especially the people who lost someone that they love, you want all members involved in a case like this to be able to be fit to stand trial. So far, I'm not hearing that she's saying she wants to plead not guilty due to reason of insanity. I'm not hearing that. I'm hearing whether it's the judge that determined this or if she went through some type of psychiatric evaluations, that person who has no reason to say yes or no to a trial is saying this woman is not in a place right now where she can go to trial. So let's figure that out first, and then we'll come back and we'll resume the litigation process.
When it comes to distinguishing, because you think of what happened and it's just horrific. And how does the legal system where, you have kind of distinguishing right and wrong, but then also if there's a sense where it was the condition that she had that forced her to do this, but then she called 911. So it's kind of one of those things where like maybe she realized what she did was wrong. She's calling 911, but then the act itself may have been a result of the schizoaffective disorder she has. Like, how does the legal system kind of thread that needle where this is someone who maybe wasn't in their right mind when it happened, but then, they're still perhaps recognizing that there was a little bit of right and wrong in the way that they reacted after the fact?
It's such a complicated situation, and it makes me think again of what it's like to be dealing with something like schizoaffective disorder. So in the moments when she committed the murder, did she have no awareness or idea of what she was doing, and then something snaps, or she realizes 1 minute or 2 minutes after the murder, oh my gosh, look what I just did? That's what's so scary about being diagnosed with a severe mental health diagnosis and maybe not having the treatment that you need. What I would need to find out in this particular situation is what was going through her mind as she was committing the murder, and what was going through her mind when she called 911. Is that the moment that she realized what she did, or during the actual crime? Is there some level of awareness, but yet there's a part of her that can't stop herself from acting on these horrible impulses? That's some of what we need to find out. And it's the same thing with the Nick Reiner case. It's very similar. One of the differences that I'm hearing between the two cases is when we were hearing more about Nick following the crime, we were hearing that he was sitting in a cell, what sounded to me like almost like catatonic or just sort of blank and just not there. I don't know what's going on with Angie, and I don't know if that's how she presented after, but this is a really, really difficult case, and it's not an answer. Like, we can't decide, you and I, she was insane or she was not insane. There's going to have to be a lot of conversations that she's going to have as she's going through meeting with the forensic psychologist or psychiatrist, and that's when we're going to really find out, did this woman know what she was doing, or was she that out of her mind when she committed the murder that she was actually insane and should not be found guilty?
How common in cases like this, if someone's diagnosed with something like she is and they're initially found unfit to stand trial, where they are just never fit to stand trial?
It can happen. The thing is, when you're involved in the legal system and she's now going to be put into some type of psychiatric facility, the good thing about that is we know that she will have eyes on her. She'll be meeting with obviously psychiatrists and therapists, and she'll be in a supervised, contained setting. There are some people who, after they commit a crime like this, they're not actually getting any type of intervention for their mental health disorder. So in that case, that person, we may not find out what's going to go on with that person, but because she was caught and she called 911 and now she's being charged with murder, she will have intervention and we'll learn more about her and what actually happened.
Does she, she has the, this intervention and, hopefully she'll get better. But then at the same time, there's kind of like on the other end of it, once you get better, you're going to have to face the reality of being charged with murder. How much mercy does the court system kind of recognize that, and is this a case where it's like, okay, you're mentally better now to stand trial. And if found guilty, you'll be headed to a state facility potentially for the rest of your life.
Yeah. This is where it gets really tricky too, because it depends on who the judge is. It depends on the statements that the surviving family members are making. I don't think there's a clear cut answer. I think it goes case by case. My thought for people like her who are struggling with such severe mental illnesses is that whether she's in a state psychiatric facility or she's locked up in prison, no matter where she goes, she now will have to spend the rest of her life, when she becomes back in herself in a more sane way, she's going to have to spend the rest of her life dealing with what she did. And again, I don't say that to let her off the hook or because I feel bad for her. I say it because there's mental health issues, and obviously not everybody with a mental health issue is committing a crime, but this is why we need to really take seriously the diagnosis like schizoaffective disorder. If it's not treated and if you're not being supervised or having the appropriate intervention, you could ruin your life or someone else's. That's why mental health issues need more attention, because these cases would be less and less, maybe, if more people had access and were educated about what is schizoaffective disorder and what am I supposed to do if I have it.
And I think too, I mean, for Anita Avers, her mom, who worked in the space, as a therapist dealing with, people who might have marriage issues, it said, or some sort of, anxiety, depression. That's what she dealt with. And she had someone in her own life who clearly was dealing with mental health issues. And then, because we've been covering the case, like I do think of Rob and Nick Reiner and how Rob Reiner, for as successful as he was, he was at the end of the day a dad as well as his wife, Michelle Reiner, and they were parents trying to figure out how they could help their son, and we'll see whether schizophrenia plays into his defense. And I know there's a debate there, but just in your line of work, like how do people who have someone who they love and they want to help living in the same home as them, who's also incredibly dangerous, allegedly in this case, because of a very serious mental health disorder, like how do people navigate this successfully?
I think the best thing you can do if you're a family member and you're living with someone with a mental health issue, even if you're a therapist, because just because I'm a therapist, when it's my family or my child, I'm not going to see things as clearly because it's my family. The best thing you can do is have access to resources, educate yourself, talk to therapists, go online and join groups that are all about psychoeducation. That's the thing. When it's someone in our family and we love that person, that part of us that doesn't want to have to accept the denial or the not my child, it could be anyone that we love. And whether we work in the field or I do what you do for a living, doesn't matter. When it's our own child or family member, all the part of us that has logic, it goes out the window because we don't want to have to think that someone that we love could also be really unwell. So I think education, being open and understanding that anything can happen to any one of us, and figuring out if something is happening like this in our own family, we need support too. We need to be able to talk about our own feelings and be able to say, no, this is happening in my family. Now that I know it's happening, what actionable steps can I take to educate myself and make sure whether in Nick Reiner's case, the parents and all the people involved have the support that they need. We want to prevent these cases. We don't want to keep going on air talking about these stories. And without education and intervention, the likelihood that something's going to happen is much more likely.
No, and incredibly well put. Sherry Botwin, it's always great to have you on Law and Crime. I know you have a book out called Thriving After Trauma. What do people need to know about that?
The thing that I really want to tell people is, trauma can lead to all types of horrible outcomes. It's about really facing and acknowledging and letting yourselves know the truth and what actionable steps can you take if you've been through something, or in this case, if you have a family member that's very unwell and has committed a horrible crime. What are the actionable steps that people can take to continue living life, even in the aftermath of awful situations?
Yeah, and certainly talking about a very tough case here out of Wichita, Kansas. Sherry Botwin, licensed clinical social worker, trauma expert. It's always great to have your insight here on Law and Crime. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
In her obituary, Anita Avers was described as a woman of faith who had a passion for counseling and helping people who struggled with mental health. She was a clinical and family therapist in Wichita. Her biography reads that she specialized in treating adults experiencing depression, anxiety, spectrum disorders, trauma, and mood disorders, as well as relationship issues, including couples, marriages, family conflict, infidelity, and divorce. And what we noticed in her obituary really stood out to us is that one of the people that she is survived by is her daughter, Angelynn Mock. That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify, and now you can find episodes of On the Case on Peacock. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.